Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We are your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we are so excited to have Pete Sack on the podcast. Welcome, Pete.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to discussing your journey as an artist in the Raleigh area, how your visual style has evolved over the years, and the role that experimentation plays in your creative process, as well as recording a bonus segment at the end on cultivating a collector base for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
But real quick, before we dive in, let's go ahead and share a little bit about you and your background for our listeners who may not be familiar with your work. So Pete Sack is a Raleigh-based professional artist known for his multifaceted portraits that challenge viewers to consider the many layers that evoke feelings of familiarity and human expression. His work stands in stark contrast to social media scrolling that encourages quick judgment with only the briefest of glances. In 2005, Pete became a resident artist at Art Space in downtown Raleigh, where he began to establish himself as an emerging artist in the area. Then later in 2016, he took a position at SAS Institute as one of their artists in residence, which forced him into a figurative creative comfort zone into the abstract world. Pete's current work includes both abstract and figurative pieces, each of which allowing him to share different expressions of himself. Today, Pete works from a studio in downtown Raleigh where visitors are always welcome. He is represented by the Mile of Fine Art and regularly shows his work in the Triangle area. And of course, this is a very formal introduction for our listeners, Pete, but how would you describe your work to someone who has never seen it before?
I hate that question because I'm terrible at it. Basically, and I guess the through line between all the abstract, the figurative, and the cyanotypes that I work in is always going to be layers. And I think for me, it's wanting to not have everything on the surface, just have things hidden only for myself or cause the viewer to actually have to investigate deeper. I feel like it's a conversation between me and the viewer on a one-on-one basis. And it's not just you just take one look and you get one snapshot and you get it all. I think I like pieces that make you see things that you haven't seen before, even like years later. So I think that's the common through line between all the different variations of my work.
Love it. Absolutely. Well, and several of us, definitely Jackie and myself, we also employ layers. So that definitely resonates, that idea of like what's in there embedded within and then what can be discovered after the fact. And I don't know, everybody can bring their own interpretation to it. But as we were preparing for the podcast, I kept thinking, when did we first meet you? I'm thinking maybe Art Space First Fridays, could have been at Anchor Light, some kind of event there.
I know that we've crossed paths numerous times,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't just till like the last few months that we actually were able to have conversations. But it was always great to see you guys out and about, and I enjoy love the energy you guys are bringing to the art scene these days.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's one of those, as emerging artists or any artists that are like establishing themselves in any city, no matter what their level, once you start going to art openings and different events and kind of embodying these creative spaces, you start slowly seeing the same familiar faces of, oh, a couple openings and who's that person, who's that, or getting introduced as friends. I know you and I have crossed paths at previous events through Adam Cohen, a mutual artist friend of all of ours, and our Appealing Transitions event that him and I worked on together. So seeing you there. And I think that's the cool part about being an artist, is that almost like smaller community within a larger city that we are all connected by, and the many forms that our art takes, and how they can cross paths. But I am curious. I mean, you do have such an extensive resume of experience, even just within Raleigh. But when did you first start, like, taking us back? When did you first start intentionally pursuing opportunities with your artwork?
So I'm sort of a late bloomer in terms of that. For me, art was always just a thing that I just did. It wasn't. I didn't have an end game. I didn't have an idea that I'd be in galleries or museums. It was more just, this was my private time just to do whatever. In high school, I'd paint sports figures and with watercolor, and that's how I learned how to draw and paint. It was purely just for the joy of it and creating nothing more. And I carried that through. I got a degree in college for painting at East Carolina, and I still didn't like, oh, this is going to be what I'm doing. It's like, no, this is what I'm good at. I'm not good at a lot of things or most anything, but this is one thing I happen to be good at. So might as well push it. But again, I was like, I'm still going to get a job out of college and but I still, and I think that was like unintentionally, I knew I wanted to make time for art, but I never wanted it to be a career. And so for the longest time, I had a day job that I was fortunate to able to leave it at work and then find 2 hours a day in the evening to paint. And so, yeah, it really wasn't until I was at Litmus Studios for a number of years. Leah Newman, who used to work at ArtSpace, we were studio mates. And then it wasn't until the residency, the emerging artist at ArtSpace, that's where it was like, oh, I was kind of thrust into the public for the first time. And I'm forever grateful for the opportunity. I mean, it is a unique experience to have to be in the public eye, which I'm not keen on, but but it benefits you as an artist. It puts you out there. So I can see the benefits. And again, it was that sort of catapulted me into a different stratosphere. And like you said, I mean, this is a small town, but it's also, I don't know, to be able to feel like I fit in the art world was always difficult for me. So it's taken a while, it's taken a long time, but here I am.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what was your day job? You said when you were balancing both a day job and your creative practice. What
I
was
worked
that?
for a publisher. I was a supervisor for a customer service department. Then I transitioned into a project manager for their warehouse, and which again, I was able to leave work there, and I was able to travel to New York like a number of times and to London. So I was extremely fortunate, and they were able to work the schedule out so I could go to art space during the day for my residency and stuff like that. And then,
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome. Yeah, and I think that's one thing. I mean, you touched on two things that we talk about a bunch on the podcast. One thing that I talk about a lot of being a full-time artist with a full-time day job is definitely very common. That's something I'm balancing right now as well. A lot of people have the flexibility with working remote as well to make that possible. But then also the idea of having a community-facing studio and how that really shifts your creative practice. You get input from all the visitors. You get people peering in your window, like, what are you working on? Even when your door is closed. But you also get that exposure. You get to build your audience. People become aware of you simply because you have a space in which they can come visit, which I think is a super unique opportunity as well.
yeah. I didn't realize how messy of an artist I was until I was there, and like, oh man, I got to clean up again. I thought I just cleaned up.
Every first Friday doing the overhaul of, oh, wait, people are like big
Yep.
groups of people are coming.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotta make sure it's not a safety hazard. That's hilarious. And that's great too, that you were able to have the regular day job as well as do art on the side. Definitely relate. I did that for 13 years, working corporate finance and doing art on the side.
Mm.
It's rough. It can be rough.
But just on that note, I think it's what I found the best thing about it. I was able to do the art that I wanted to do because I didn't have to survive on my art. And I think as a young artist, until like you're in your 30s, that's important because you don't feel like it doesn't kill your soul in a way like you have to compromise yourself. You can be free and do whatever you want because you know that that's what it's about, just having fun, and you're not having to survive on it, especially early on when it could be really debilitating.
Agreed. Agreed. And I think that's probably what kept me from it, at least on my end, though. I didn't go to art school. I went to business school. So I had the
Mm.
extra burden on top of saying I can't be a real artist because I didn't go to art school. So I can only do it on the side. So it was like, no, I'll do the business side and then art on the anyways. We're not going to unpack that today, but you mentioned the artist residency at ArtSpace. Another residency, as Jackie was reading your bio, that kind of piqued the interest, was artist in resident at the SAS Institute. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that worked?
Yeah, that
What
was
did it entail?
it was I replaced a woman who'd been there for 25 years, so the residency part always kind of irked me. It's like, no, this is like a full-time job. Which I think ultimately it should have been a residency. But I was there for 5 years, and I was hired strictly just to paint they've got 2 artists on campus, and I had a studio on their campus, and I painted. The day I started, they broke ground on their largest building, and they wanted 1,000 pieces of art in that building. Not all original, like the back house would be print, but the lobby and stuff was all going to be original. So that was my focus for 2 years. And I did, in the 5 years, I did 150 paintings for them. And like I said, they didn't want figurative, which was up until that point, that's all I knew. That's all I did. And so I had to learn how to paint abstract paintings. And I mean, also landscapes and whatnot, but I forced myself to like get out of my comfort zone and play. And they were so supportive. Like, I don't think they ever, other than like minor tweaks to paintings, they never said, "Oh no, you can't do that." And so I was a kid in cancer. They paid for everything, all the supplies.
Wow.
The sky was the limit. Anything I wanted to do, I was in a workshop where they had routers and CNC routers and whatever. So I had access to any supply I wanted. And I would just go on the internet. It's like, oh, I like that artist. I like that painting. I'm going to see what it's like, how to paint that way. And if after 8 hours it sucked, I would just paint over it the next day and start something new. And I didn't feel like I lost. That's the thing. Like during the day, the other job where I'd have 2 hours a day, those 2 hours are so precious that I didn't want to waste them. But here I was getting paid to paint for 8 hours a day. So I felt like I could do whatever I wanted. And I did. And it was like what I learned there, I could never, it would have taken me 100 years to learn all these skills and techniques, because I got paid to do it.
Yeah, it's almost like you went to art school, but you got paid for those classes to paint. I mean, you were teaching yourself in a way, but it's almost like, you know how they say a lot of folks, part of why they don't go from, college into doing art full time is how you're going to pay your bills. But here you are getting paid to literally practice your craft and learn new techniques and push yourself. And, you get paid anyways, regardless.
Yeah,
wow, that is so cool.
At the end of my time, I got laid off because of the pandemic, but I felt like even from day one, I was playing with house money to like do all that. But after 4 or 5 years, I was getting burnt out, and I was like, man, this really should be a residency. Any artist should eat this, would love this. And just for a couple of years, just to have that security of I can do whatever I want, and I'm not relying on what I'm making to pay my bills. That's taken care of. So now I can just do whatever I want. So, and that, I mean, yeah, I'm forever grateful for that opportunity as well.
That sounds incredible. And I'm curious. I mean, you even saying 4.5 years, just that thought of, okay, we're painting making 8 hours a day, essentially every day for that long. I'm not surprised that you may have felt a little burnt out by the end of it. I can only imagine how the woman that had done it for 20, 25 years before you felt, of just kind of that sigh of relief afterwards, because you're constantly going.
Yeah. And that's 150 paintings that I finished. There's like many layers of bad paintings underneath those paintings. A lot of stinkers.
Yeah. And now real quick, how did that opportunity come about? Was it like an open, like job listing essentially? It was an open call?
It was. I was at the time, my other job, I wanted to leave so bad. I wanted to do art full time, but I just didn't have the nerve. And then this job was posted, and a couple people sent it my way. I'm like, oh. And it was just a series of the first round was just a resume, and then the second round was 20 images. And then it was like, it whittled down to 10 artists in the area. And we all had to do 2 paintings. One was a realistic Italian architecture, realist, earth tones, whatever medium you wanted, no smaller than 30 by 40. The second painting was abstract, modern, going in an elevator lobby, and it had to be a completely different medium than the one you did previous. And same, it had to be larger than 30 by 40. And we had 2 weeks to do it. And so it sort of put us all on even ground. And
wow.
And that's what, and I mean, Sasser, they bought like all the ones that they didn't, the 9 other artists, they bought one of the pieces from the artist. So it was like,
that's awesome.
Like
so it's like time for their time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I thought it was just a cool way to do it. To like, it had just different levels of like, you had to be quick. You had to do those in 2 weeks, and you had to be able to listen and follow instructions. But ultimately, the job itself, there was never any like guidelines like
They're like, that's the most involved they're in the entire process. And they're like, okay,
Really?
great, you got the green light. Now see you in 4 years. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Which I mean,
were you working with like a marketing department or interior designer? Like I've
Every
known
once
some
in a while.
companies that will have that and will say like the feeling that we're establishing for this wing, for this department is XYZ. Here's the color scheme. Do whatever you want, but follow these main
There
guidelines
was
of sort.
there was a couple, like they have their own interior designer department there, and so they would share with us Pinterest boards of what they were thinking
Okay.
of ultimately, but also they would just go on the website, that the internal website, and like pick the art that we had made. We do the painting, upload it, and then they would just go and basically shop in our
That is so
uh,
cool.
on our website for what we had made.
That is so cool.
that's super cool. Yeah, and I'm sure that constant idea of exploration and really playing in your creative practice inevitably influence how your style is today. Because even just the short time that I've known you, I mean, your work has such different styles. You're always exploring different mediums, as you said, figurative and abstract. And
Mhm.
so, of course, with them wanting more abstract pieces, that was a very stark shift in your process. But what typically like initiates that exploration or experimentation now in your creative process, now that you're fully in control and not having to make a 40-inch painting in 2 weeks?
Right. I think for it did awaken something that I've always thought. Like I think back to when I was in high school and played baseball. Like I didn't specialize in one position. I played all nine positions. Not great, but I was able to step in as need be. And I feel like for me that was always important to keep it interesting for me. I never wanted to just. I kind of envied the artists who could just paint one style for their whole life. But then I knew that I would never. I would that would never be something I would strive for. I have a different. I get excited when I break new ground, even if it's incremental. I enjoy that. So this was just another way. And I found if I had a show, I would take like 3 months off, like to decompress and recharge. But I felt like this was a way for me to tap into something new. So I'd be able to switch gears and find something. So the cyanotypes, especially, that was something I just fell into and just fell in love with in this past year. But it took me out. I didn't have to paint. I was like, I didn't paint for 6 months, but
Mm.
it was another tool in my tool belt. But I think so now I've got 3 lanes I can drive in, so I can, like in January, I did these 7 large abstracts. Now I'm good for at least 6 months with the abstract. Now I can focus on figurative, and then I can go to cyanotypes, and I think it's just a way for me to like subconsciously, in a way, recharge what I need to while I'm still working.
Absolutely love that. It's like I've done cyanotypes as well. I've done painting as well. I've done different styles. Last year I started going hardcore into ceramics and breaking into the third dimension, so to speak. And it's like I completely understand that because it's like all these other mediums can help feed back into the main engine, if you will,
Mhm.
right? Like they're all tributaries that like feed into that main river of creativity coming out of you.
Right.
And especially when one little section's getting dry, then you just find how to recharge it elsewhere. But um, with all that being said, I mean, it's funny. You're like cyanotypes, and I've seen some of your abstracts that have the same shade of blue as cyanotypes, and it's like pizza. There it is. Um, so I love how all these are coming through. But from your perspective, either conceptually or process wise, other than layers, which you mentioned earlier on, are there other through lines that have been emerging in your work throughout the years where you're like, there's these three things that always pop up, no matter what medium it is?
I mean, I think it's I'm learning more about myself, um, through therapy, through whatever. And I think that's what these working out these paintings in a way is also a form of therapy for me. I'm more of a just get it out, let the dust settle, and then figure out why I painted it. And that goes for the abstracts, for the figurative. I don't know why I do them, but I know that they're a part of me, and that's the other through lines that my hand is in every one of them. So there is always going to be, no matter what you do, as long as if the same artist is doing all these different mediums, there's going to be a connection to all those different mediums. And um, yeah, I just I enjoy the fact that I can get something out and then try to investigate, why did I do that? Why did I paint this? What does this mean? And usually I always enjoy that, just to like, what was going on in this part of my life that um I needed to paint this way. And I also like exploring myself. Again, boundaries are important to me. And I feel like that, like the figurative work, I do a tight watercolor first, and that's my boundary. Then I can play with it with oil on top of that. And then with the most recent abstracts, I devise these boundaries that this is what I can play in, but these are the boundaries I'm going to set for myself within these for these paintings. And so yeah, I think doing stuff like that's always fun too.
Yeah, it sounds almost like some of the through lines with what you just explained that are like catching on, coming up to me is like you're allowing your intuition to have a big role
Mm,
into how you create the work, and that you're a process oriented kind of guy. Like you're letting the process kind of almost like you're being a medium in a way through
mm,
that creativity that's coming out of you. So that through line is whatever you're expressing or translating through the canvas is what I like to think of it, right? Or through the art, but you're not presetting these things in advance of like, today I'm going to paint this thing. It's more like,
right.
no, I'm going to show up, see what happens, and then figure out the rest later.
I think, and that's the important thing is
It's great.
showing up, but also getting out of my own way, and just not like. I think
Love it.
that's when I try to like, and I appreciate artists who can like have an idea in mind and see it to the end. I just when I try to do that, it tends to end up being stale, or I overthink it and just it loses its whatever. So just getting out of my own way and just letting see what happens.
Yeah, you cannot overthink a good painting. You just have to show up and get your hands moving.
Yeah.
And there is a freedom too of being a beginner again in your own process. Like
Mm,
putting
yeah.
some kind of restraints of feeling a little bit uncomfortable, getting out of your cycle, and out of that set routine, but
Hmm.
within restrictions. And I think it's really common for a lot of people that I've talked to, especially ones who have done workshops on a regular basis or especially gone to art school, because when looking back at my process, going back to art school and grad school, of thinking you're on like you're given parameters, you're given assignments and timelines, and so there's almost a freedom of exploring within those restraints that I think
Hmm.
sparks the creativity. Sometimes I feel like artists are either two ways, like they completely like rebel against any type of restraint or structure, or
Mm,
they get excited about structure and restraint, because then if you want to break the rules, it's all self-imposed rules,
right. I
like
mean, I
make a
think that's
painting with these four colors, and then if you feel really really compelled to add a fifth color, do it. But like having that restraint and
mhm.
choice within your process can be super super powerful of unlocking that secret magic I think that everyone connects with.
Yeah, and then I think it goes along the same lines of like staring at a blank canvas. That's a lot, kind of like leaving art school where you're all of a sudden left to your own devices. And like, I don't have this, like, it can be overwhelming to people. And same with, like, for me, it's the opposite. It's ending a painting is the thing that sort of overwhelms me at times because, like, I don't know, especially the abstract, I don't know how to end a painting. I mean, there's times like it will tell you, and that's what, and the other thing, the allowing I'm 47 years old, but the job at SAS it showed me that there's so many things to do out there. And that's why I didn't want to be just like relegated just to figurative paintings. Like I kind of want to do it all. And because it is fun. It has to be fun. And there's a lot of cool things to do out
Yeah, and I'm
there.
curious too, like having that such drastic shift, and I feel like figurative and abstract are very starkly different styles. What were maybe some of those realizations or things that you struggled with when shifting to abstract? You mentioned like finishing a painting, it maybe is less clear as to when
Mm,
it's done. Because I think
yeah.
oftentimes when people who quote unquote don't get art, they understand, they look at an old master oil painting of a figure and they
Mhm.
say, wow, that person's super talented. And then they look at an abstract artist and they say, well, I don't get it. And so those seem to be the stark reactions. And I'm curious of the perception of skill level with the two also. But as abstract artists, we all know it's such a different vocabulary, which
Mm,
almost makes it harder because it's less obvious in
mm.
a way.
Yeah. Yeah. That was it struggled with it because I felt I didn't have and like with figurative stuff, there's already a structure there to play within, and I know when it could end, when it's going to stop. Whereas abstract, they could go on forever. and not being, I was totally uncomfortable with that idea of not knowing where it was going and just trusting intuition and trusting yourself that it's going to lead somewhere. It was months and months of frustration of trying to figure out, of just letting go of any thoughts that I had, and just trust that you're going to find your way through it. And that was, I think, at that time, also getting laid off and not having been tethered to a job for the first time in 30 years. It was a similar feeling of like, oh my gosh, I could do whatever I want. And then you're like, oh man, I miss that structure. It's almost like Stockholm syndrome. Like, oh, I miss I miss that structure, even though I hated it. But
Which
so
honestly,
cool.
I think that's a fair point though, where I think a lot of the time people often like complain about their day jobs in a way of like, oh, I wish I didn't have this. Like, and it's an easy quote unquote like excuse for holding people back. Like, oh, well, I can't go all in because I have this day job, or I can't commit to this because I have it. And then when all the handcuffs are off, you're like, whoa, now I don't have any excuses left, and
Right.
it's all on me.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it'd been on my mind for so long to do art for years. It'd been weighing on me. And then the minute I got laid off, it was like this weight was lifted, and it was like, oh my God, it felt so good. And like, oh, I'm in it now. I'm in it. But up until that point, you're right. I think it's, if you want to paint, you will make time to paint. If you want to create, you will make time. And there's no right way to do it. I think you have to trust yourself that you know what art looks like to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that took me a long time to figure out too, because I didn't look like an artist. I didn't look like
What do you think an artist looks like?
From what movies showed me, or what like advertising, like, or people would dress like artists. And I just assume, oh man, they're probably really good. But I just learned that those who look most like an artist generally suck, and those who look like an everyday person are usually the good ones, because they're in it for the right reasons.
They don't have to prove themselves. They don't have to put on a show or like be like, this is my identity as an artist. When they walk in their room, you're like,
I'm glad y'all didn't say overalls though, because I'm like, that's my uniform. It protects my clothes from all the paint splatter. They're just practical. But I wouldn't go out there with paint splattered overalls either. People have go, so you must be an artist. Heck no, they can't tell. I get that. No, I absolutely love this, and I love that idea too. I think that's also what, at least personally, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of people, why I didn't quit the corporate life as quickly as I could have. It turns into what's called the golden handcuffs. Like, you want to leave, but the pay is good. Like it, and the money from that job finances your travel and your canvases and your paint and your art supplies. You know, so it's like, other than your residency, which that was like obviously a very, very special arrangement, but normal jobs, you know, you're usually like, get me out of here. I just want to make art. But how can I get paid? You know, the big golden question. But I do want to ask you, so obviously, like you said, you know, sometimes you make something and then it's like 6 months, I'm good for that. I don't have to make it again. Or, you know, there could have been a little bit of that burnout and whatnot. But do you have a daily or consistent creative routine that you incorporate into your actual process? Daily, almost daily kind of guy?
I did it up until like 2 months ago, when I had coffee with Adam Cohen, and he told me his secrets of how to do time management, and it's been like an awakening that, like, oh my gosh, I'm glad I learned this now, but I could have used it years ago. So I feel like I'm a lot more regimented now, just in terms of what I need to do, and being able to leave the studio knowing like, okay, I did what I wanted to do, and I don't have to think about art for the rest of the day. And I think that was the big thing, just to like set my day up in a way that was loose but also restrictive, and setting timers to like get out of my head or get out of the zone, and to remind myself, oh, I need to like start winding down, or I would give myself time to wind up, but also setting 30 minutes for that, 30 minutes for this. And I think that it took me a long time to figure that out. And thank you, Adam, for shining that light on.
Hey, we just had him on the podcast not long ago. So yeah, a lot of gems there. Are you using like visual timers? Just curious.
No, just my clock on my phone.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
But ultimately, because I would go every day, and I that's the other, I needed to stop going. Like I had take a day off, and I have a hard time doing that because
That's
I
the
love it.
same.
That's the thing. I didn't feel like, oh, I gotta go. It's like every time I walk up the stairs in my studio, I was like, oh my god, what am I going to do today? So I feel like it was a good problem to have, but still, I was like, I need to like people. I'm a human being. I need to recharge too.
Same.
But going, I mean, just going to the studio every day was something that I just showing up was important for me. But now I have a little more structure in that I'm not wait. I always felt like I was wasting precious time by just not having anything to focus on. I was just like, whatever I want to do that day, I did. But now I'm a little more structured in how I execute that.
Yeah, and
Same.
that sounds
So
awesome. I
many
mean,
similar goals. I mean, because it is my full-time job, I go almost every day, literally to art space, almost every single. If you let me, especially in the holidays, 7 days a week. I'm dead serious. I'm like Christmas, I'm there. New Year's, I'm
Mhm.
there, unless I have family commitments, which of course there's that. There's other humans too, but otherwise, it's really hard. I've been using, and we've talked about it on the podcast, an app called Clockify to keep track. And when I'm not serious, I'm sharing. I'm always sharing this one forward because it's so good. It is a time management app, and you can
Okay.
be as granular as you want. It's up to you, and color code things and whatnot. But what I started doing, I was like, you know, those weeks when you finish the week, you've been in the studio all week, and then you feel like you haven't done anything.
Mhm.
Well, if you're tracking what you're doing during that time, I could look back and be like, I feel like I didn't do anything. So I pull up my app. I worked 63 hours last week. Lovely. And I spent so much on emails and customer follow-ups and project proposals, so much on like podcasts, of course, you know, so much actually painting or doing ceramics, but I can see where the time went and what the projects are. And then it just kind of gives you that sense of, okay, this coming week when I'm planning how I'm going to do these time blocks, kind of like you were talking about structure, I need to
Mhm.
devote a little more time to emails, for example, because I'm terrible at that one. Or Instagram, for Instagram. Um, but like, yeah. Anyways, figured I would ask you what you were using for it. Always love to
That's
share those forward.
Clockify.
Yes.
yeah.
I'll check it out.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good one because I think it's also one of those things where there's always that like infamous quote of like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life,
Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
which I think is kind of BS in
Mhm.
that like it's not that, but it's if you love what you do, you'll never work harder in your life. And
Mm.
it's not that it will always feel super draining as work. As you said, like there are days you walk in, you're like, I am so excited to be here. And
Mhm.
you're working for 8, 10, maybe 12 hours in one day. And it
Mhm.
feels very different than someone telling you what you have to do. But it's also still work. And we have to remember that like we have to take care of our bodies
Mhm.
and we don't get like we talk about in the podcast a lot, that fine line between feeling burnt out and like starting to feel crispy, like those signs of like,
Hmm.
what are the tendencies that show where like, you know, you're about to burn out, but you're not quite there yet. So you always have to like pull the emergency level, turn off the oven, but still
And
keep
go
the
take a
cooking
day off.
cooking. Yeah.
Or I've got a nest in my studio that I just sleep. I if I feel like I need to step away, and I'll take a 2-3 hour nap, and I'll be like, all right, now I'm good. That's all
Yes.
I needed. And get back. I had to keep on telling my landlord I'm not squatting there. Just it is a way for me to recharge. But I'm a big fan of the nap.
Also recognizing that flow of energy too, because that's I think the other hard thing, kind of going back to the finding the structure in your day, is understanding as an artist like when are you most creative and
Yeah.
when can you do like the admin work. Like do you find that you're super focused and energized in the morning or in the afternoon, or as you were saying, what do you have to do to kind of like build yourself up into getting into the zone, and then
Mm,
how do you like decompress so you don't accidentally get in the zone at 9 p.m. and then you're up all night and then you have to get up early. So it's
yeah.
also like, I always say, I feel like being a full time artist, it's your job to understand your workflow habits and
Hmm.
strengths,
Yeah.
which you don't have to do in a corporate environment because they tell you when you have to be productive. They say you have to work from 8 to 5 and you take a lunch break at this time and like deal with it versus
Yeah.
as an artist, you have the benefit of being able to learn about yourself, but we're never taught how to do that. Of like,
Yeah.
recognize your trend. Like, when do you get tired? When do you get energized? Which I think is super, super interesting.
I think,
Um,
yeah, to that point, it's like even within a day job, like nobody is for 8 hours on point for 8 hours.
mhm,
Any artist I mean, for me, like it probably of those 8 hours, a good three are like I'm good.
This is
Otherwise, I'm drifting here and there, or like I don't know. I you're right. The knowing I'm a morning person. I paint best in the morning or after 6 o'clock. But from noon to six, I'm not worth a lot. So that's when I do. That's when I do clerical stuff or take my nap.
Mhm.
Um,
Help
but yeah,
recharge.
it took me a long time to figure like, oh, this is the sweet spot for me.
Mhm. Same, same. It's like when you've been painting 6.5 hours, your feet hurt, you realize you're hungry, your head starts hurting, your wrist starts like, I don't know, acting up. You're like, wait, again, that's where things like those apps that we're talking about come in, where you look like, oh, I need to walk away. Because also you
The
start making more mistakes, and then you're like, you start kind of getting upset, like, oh, I meant to do this line straight and it squiggled, and then you're just like, okay, it's just that I feel like the more we paint, potentially depending each artist, right, the more chances for self-awareness
Mhm.
that we
Yeah.
bring up. And then it's our part of our unspoken job as artists to being like, how can we be more efficient and better to ourselves? Like, okay, don't do that again. And if you're going to stand 6 hours in front of a canvas, at least stand on a memory mat, memory foam mat. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Not on a hard floor. Like, anyways, those kind of things I feel like, can help. But as we come towards the end, Pete, one of the questions we like to ask every artist is, how do you define success as an artist?
Right now, I define success as I can pay my bills and I go to the studio every day. And it sounds minor, but for somebody who's been working for 45 or for 30 years, like to have that idea, like, oh, this is actually my life that I can do this. Like early on, I was like, I need to be in galleries, I need to be in shows, I need to be in which is fine, and I still want that. But if I get down to the bare essentials, like to be able to support myself and paint at the same time, there's nothing that's fantastic. That's
Mhm.
I don't know what's better than that.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Okay,
Yeah,
we might be a little biased, but
that's about it. Yeah.
But and it could be anything. It doesn't have to be art. It could just be, but to know that like whatever, and not everybody's good at stuff. So you don't have to like that whole like I gotta quit my job and follow my passion. Like no, you don't. There's a lot of bad art, bad writing out there. We don't need more, but for you can do it on the side and still feel fulfilled. But I think I'm completely satisfied with where I'm at right now in my life, and anything beyond this is great. But this is the baseline of happiness, and I'm doing good.
I love it. Love it. Now, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Oh, there's that's hard. There's so much I would have. I think it goes along the same lines of those like not feeling like I fit in or look like an artist. I think there's also the like I'm more of a tortoise than the herring, and knowing being comfortable at your at the pace that you're comfortable with and why you're doing it is you set yourself up for a longer career if you know the pace in which you work in. And I just slow and steady for me, and just showing up every day was what I needed to do. And I think to tell myself like that's okay. That you don't have to be a superstar right out of college or in your by your 30s, or compare yourself to other artists and where they were when you're your age. Um, and it doesn't it's a long life. It's a marathon.
love it. If someone just randomly hands you $100, what would you splurge on or invest in? Has to be something that relates to, it has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
I'm always a sucker for a sketchbook. I've got so many sketchbooks that I've worked a couple pages and I'll find a new one, a better one. Then I'll do a couple pages and I'll find it. So I'm always looking for the best. And I think a good travel sketchbook is something that I'll splurge money on, and then
Oh,
not fill it up. And I'll go to the next one.
what size do you typically do for your travel sketchbook? I'm curious. I just started like drawing like out of my studio. That's one thing I'm trying to commit more to this year. kind of getting out in the world to create. So what size do you typically gravitate towards?
I do the watercolor on site. So it's more of a landscape, like longer. So maybe like 5 by 10, maybe around that size, or that composition format. But I also have an accordion one that I'm also playing with that is super long. But yeah, I don't know. There's so many out there that I just enjoy them all.
Yeah.
Nice.
Gotta play, gotta experiment, switch it up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Pete, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Real quick before you go, how can they stay connected with you after they listen to today's episode?
You can follow me on Instagram at Pete Sack Art. It's all one word. And yeah, or my website at petesack.com, SACK.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to link all those things in the show notes. And Pete, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can discuss any advice you have on cultivating a collector base for the bonus segment for our podcast supporters?
Sure.
Nice.
Awesome. So for listeners, if you want to become a podcast supporter, head on over to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your favorite parts, you can follow us on social media, Madame May Art, across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.